Why does a jaguar shatter a caiman's skull like a hammer hitting a light bulb instead of puncturing the throat? This isn't the suffocating grip of a lion or the windpipe crush of a leopard. It is a mechanical failure of bone under extreme pressure. In the river basins of the Brazilian Pantanal, researchers have documented a hunting method that defies the standard feline playbook. While lions and tigers rely on prolonged strangulation to subdue large prey, this predator bypasses the struggle. It targets the thickest part of the cranium, the armored housing of the brain, and simply crushes it. Field researchers describe the sound as a sharp, wet crack echoing across the water. This display of raw kinetic energy seems mathematically impossible for an animal of this size. In 1983, Alan Rabinowitz waded into the humid shadows of the Coxcomb Basin in Belize. He carried a radiotelemetry receiver and a notebook damp with perspiration through air smelling of rotting vegetation and stagnant water. Rabinowitz was there to conduct the first long-term study of wild jaguars, a creature that had remained a ghost to science for centuries. He tracked one specific male through the undergrowth, listening to the rhythmic beep of a collar that told him the cat was moving through territory no human had mapped. He eventually found the remains of a kill that stopped him in his tracks. A large turtle lay on the forest floor with its shell split open. It hadn't been cracked by a fall, it had been bitten through. Rabinowitz noted the impossibility of the feat. A turtle's shell is an evolutionary fortress, yet here it was, opened like a piece of fruit. The physics of the feline jaw usually follow a predictable scale where bigger cats produce stronger bites. A 500-pound Siberian tiger should exert significantly more force than a jaguar half its weight. In 2005, Dr. Stephen Rowe at the University of New South Wales decided to test this assumption using complex biomechanical modeling. He looked past the muscle to examine the architecture of the skull itself. His findings shook the foundations of Felidae ecology. When adjusted for body mass, the jaguar's bite force quotient outperformed every other big cat on the planet. This was a specialized biological tool designed for armor piercing. The jaguar evolved a shorter, broader snout and massive attachments for the temporalis muscles, turning its head into a living hydraulic press. Imagine the pressure required to drive a tooth through 2 inches of reinforced bone and scale. A caiman is a living relic of the Mesozoic, armored with bony osteoderms that act like chainmail beneath the skin. Yet, in footage captured by modern ROVs and trail cameras along the Cuiabá River, the interaction is almost instantaneous. The jaguar leaps from a low-hanging branch, its golden coat a blur against the green canopy. It doesn't aim for the soft belly or the legs. It pins the reptile's head and delivers a single calculated bite to the back of the skull. The caiman, a predator that has survived for millions of years, is rendered motionless in seconds. This surgical application of overwhelming force leaves no room for escape. George Schaller spent years in the 1960s watching tigers in India's Kanha National Park. He documented the tiger's immense power and its ability to drag a 1,000-pound gore through thick brush. He described the tiger as the ultimate solitary hunter, a master of stealth and precision. Even Schaller's records of tiger lethality differ fundamentally from the jaguar's mechanical aggression. The tiger is a master of the long game, using its weight to overbear. The jaguar operates on a different frequency. It is the only big cat that regularly hunts other apex predators. It seeks out the armored, the dangerous, and the difficult, winning by breaking them where they are strongest. In 2011, Fernando Sicuro at the Universidade Federal do Rio de Janeiro took this investigation deeper into the bone. He analyzed the skull morphology of neotropical felids, comparing the jaguar to its smaller cousins like the ocelot and the margay. He discovered that the jaguar's skull is not just a larger version of a cat's head, it is reinforced in specific areas to prevent the cat's own jaw from shattering under the stress of its power. The bone density in the sagittal crest, the ridge on top of the skull where jaw muscles attach, is disproportionately thick. This biological reinforcement allows the animal to channel 1,500 pounds of pressure without fracturing its own face. It is an evolutionary arms race written in calcium and muscle. There is a specific smell to the jungle after a kill. It is metallic, heavy, and sweet. In the 1940s, the hunter-naturalist Jim Corbett described the leopard and the tiger as the masters of the Indian hills, noting their distinct ways of claiming the world. He spoke of the leopard's cunning and the tiger's nobility. But even Corbett, who spent his life tracking man-eaters through the Kumaon region, never encountered a cat that sought out the skull as its primary target. The jaguar stands alone. It is a specialist in the impossible. While the leopard drags its prey into the trees to hide it, the jaguar often drags its kill into the water, confident in its role as the undisputed master of both land and river. Science is now beginning to realize that the jaguar we think we know is only the surface of a much deeper biological mystery. In the early 2000s, Mel Sunquist synthesized decades of data in his work Wild Cats of the World, noting that jaguars in different regions show massive variances in size and behavior. The jaguars of the open Pantanal are nearly double the size of those in the dense rainforests of Central America. This isn't just a matter of diet, it's a matter of functional evolution. The environments they inhabit are so demanding that the cats have branched into different mechanical specialties. Some are swimmers, some are climbers, but all of them carry that same anomalous signature in their DNA, the capacity for extreme, bone-breaking force. Why would a cat evolve to bite through bone instead of just suffocating its prey? The answer may lie in the deep past, in an era when the ancestors of these cats had to compete with giant armored ground sloths and glyptodonts. These were creatures the size of Volkswagen Beetles covered in thick, bony plates. The jaguar's bite is a relic of a world where everything was armored. It is a specialized weapon that has survived into the modern era, a biological anomaly that continues to function perfectly against today's crocodiles and turtles. It is a living fossil of a different kind, one that hasn't stopped changing. We are just beginning to archive the true limits of this predator's capability. Within the last 12 months, a new set of data has emerged from a remote sector of the Brazilian wetlands that challenges everything we thought we knew about feline limits. We will reveal the specific 2024 genomic record and the Anomaly 7 field data that proves one of these cats has evolved a physical trait that classifies it as a biological outlier, a bite force that exceeds every other land predator on Earth. This record, filed under the most extreme parameters of the index, suggests that the jaguar is not just a big cat, but a predator nearing a new evolutionary threshold. The numbers recorded in the Pantanal logs are so high that they were initially dismissed as equipment failure, until the second and third readings came back identical. What the index concludes: the jaguar is a mechanical outlier whose cranial architecture serves as a prehistoric weapon still functioning at peak efficiency in the modern age. Can a 660-pound predator be a biological liability? The Siberian tiger stands 3 feet tall at the shoulder and spans 11 feet from its nose to the tip of its tail, making it the undisputed heavyweight of the feline world. This biological fortress of muscle and orange fur is built for the absolute extremes of the Russian Far East. For decades, the standard scientific verdict remained simple: mass equals dominance. In the hierarchy of the wild, the biggest animal wins the kill, holds the territory, and dictates the rules of the forest. Researchers viewed the Siberian tiger as the pinnacle of evolution and the most powerful predator to ever walk the modern earth. In 1967, George Schaller published his landmark study, The Deer and the Tiger, after spending years in the tall grasses of India recording how these giants operate. He documented a predator that could drag a 1,000-pound gore uphill for several hundred yards. The math seemed settled because a creature with that much skeletal leverage and raw poundage has no equal. By the time Mel Sunquist co-authored Wild Cats of the World in 2002, the consensus was ironclad. The Siberian tiger was the king because nothing possessed the physical tools to displace it. If you were larger, you were the boss, a rule of biology that felt as stable as gravity. But the Amur region of Russia holds records that break the rule. Between 1,000, 1992 and 2003, the Wildlife Conservation Society tracked several radio-collared tigers through the Schaller Biosphere Reserve and found something that defied the laws of the food chain. On 3 separate occasions, researchers arrived at fresh kill sites to find a massive male tiger had simply walked away. The prey was still warm and the tiger was uninjured. The intruder that had chased the world's largest cat off its dinner was a Ushuri brown bear, an animal often significantly smaller than the tiger. The tiger possessed the claws, the speed, and the teeth to end the conflict in seconds, yet the king retreated. This creates a massive hole in our understanding of predatory dominance. If size and weaponry are the primary metrics of a top killer, the tiger should never lose a confrontation with a smaller competitor. K. Ullas Karanth noted similar anomalies in India's Nagarhole National Park during the mid-90s. He watched tigers, leopards, and dholes interact in a complex dance of avoidance. The tigers were 4 times the size of the leopards, yet the leopards thrived in the exact same territory. They were hunting the same prey and successfully surviving. The tiger's sheer mass was actually becoming a liability. It required more calories, moved more slowly, and lacked the tactical flexibility of its smaller cousins. The weight of the throne is a literal burden. To maintain a 600-pound frame in a frozen wasteland, a Siberian tiger must consume at least 20 pounds of meat every single day. In the winter, that requirement spikes. When a brown bear approaches a kill, the tiger performs a rapid, unconscious cost-benefit analysis. A fight carries the risk of a broken limb or a deep infection. For a specialist hunter, a minor injury is a death sentence. The tiger chooses to starve for a day rather than risk the crown. This reveals a startling truth. The world's largest cat is also the most vulnerable to the slightest shift in its environment. We see this tension in the historical logs of Jim Corbett. In 1944, he wrote about the man-eaters of Kumaon in the Indian Himalayas. Corbett was a legendary tracker who spent decades observing how big cats handle pressure. He noticed that tigers were often extremely cautious and almost paranoid compared to the smaller, bolder leopards. The leopard would hunt in the middle of a village under the glow of a lantern, while the tiger stayed in the deep shadows of the Sal forest. The tiger's size didn't make it brave. Instead, it made the animal conservative. It had more to lose, and the king was living in a state of constant, calculated retreat. Stephen Rowe's 2005 Bite Club study added another layer to the mystery. Using biomechanical modeling, Rowe measured the jaw strength of every major predator. While the tiger had massive, absolute power, its bite force quotient, the strength relative to its size, was surprisingly average. It was just a scaled-up version of a standard cat, rather than the outlier everyone expected. If the tiger isn't the most efficient killer pound for pound, and if it frequently yields its throne to smaller scavengers to avoid risk, then the title of world's largest cat starts to look like an evolutionary dead end. It is a giant built for a world that is disappearing. This brings us to a documented anomaly from the early 2000s in the Russian Far East. A male tiger known to researchers as M20 was found dead near a riverbank. There were no marks of combat or signs of starvation. When the necropsy was performed, the team found his stomach was full. He had successfully hunted a large elk just hours before his death. The cause of death was heart failure. His massive body simply couldn't keep up with the metabolic demands of his own size in the extreme cold. The very thing that made him a king eventually triggered a total systemic collapse. Science tells us that the tiger is the peak. The textbooks show the Siberian giant as the ultimate expression of feline power, but the expedition logs tell a different story. They describe a creature that is often bullied by smaller bears, outmaneuvered by adaptable leopards, and betrayed by its own massive heart. If the largest cat on Earth isn't actually the most effective predator, then our definition of a killer is fundamentally flawed. We have been measuring the wrong thing. We have been looking at the scale, when we should have been looking at the mechanics of the strike. This realization forces a shift in focus away from the frozen forests of Russia and toward the humid river basins of South America. If the Siberian tiger is a fragile giant, then there must be another cat that prioritizes function over scale. In the 1980s, Alan Rabinowitz began tracking a predator in Belize that didn't just kill its prey, it dismantled it. It was half the size of a tiger, but it didn't retreat from anything. The records from the Coxcomb Basin started to show something impossible. They documented a cat with a skull structure that shouldn't exist in nature, what the index concludes. How does a 70-pound predator haul a 300-pound giraffe carcass straight up a vertical tree trunk? In 2022, researchers in South Africa's Kruger National Park documented this specific event, recording a leopard lifting prey nearly 3 times its own body weight into the canopy. The leopard is the master of the third dimension, a phantom operating in the vertical space where tigers and jaguars are grounded by their own mass. While the tiger relies on crushing weight and the jaguar on hydraulic-like jaw pressure, the leopard utilizes a specialized musculoskeletal architecture that defies standard feline ratios. It functions as a biological hoist, generating explosive upward force, while maintaining a grip on bark that would shred the paws of a lesser predator. In 1944, the naturalist Jim Corbett noted that the leopard's true power is found in its economy of motion, rather than its size. Corbett tracked leopards through the dense, humid forests of the Kuman region, observing how they moved through the mid-canopy with the silence of a falling leaf. He described them as the most dangerous of the big cats, because they are the only ones that look down on their prey from above. A leopard's shoulder blades are not attached to a collarbone. Instead, they are embedded in a complex web of muscle and ligament. This allows the front limbs to rotate with a fluid range of motion. When a leopard climbs, it isn't just pulling, it is engaging a specialized set of retracting claws and high-density muscle fibers that function like a mechanical winch. Biology usually dictates a strict trade-off between agility and raw strength. Mel Sunquist, in his 2002 synthesis of wild cat ecology, highlighted how most predators reach a point of diminishing returns as they grow larger. A tiger is too heavy to spend its life in the trees, and a house cat is too light to move significant mass. The leopard sits in a narrow evolutionary sweet spot. Its muscle fibers are packed with a high density of fast-twitch cells, allowing for the sudden, violent bursts of power needed to fight gravity. In the Kruger incident, the leopard didn't just reach the first branch. It climbed 15 feet into the air with the young giraffe clamped in its jaws. The physics of the feat suggest a power-to-weight ratio that should be impossible for a mammal of its size. K. Ulus Karanth, conducting camera trap studies in Nagarhole, India, in 1995, discovered that leopards often thrive in the exact same territory as tigers by simply occupying the space the larger cats cannot reach. While the tiger dominates the forest floor, the leopard claims everything above 6 feet. This strategy of vertical displacement requires more than just strong legs. It requires a tail that acts as a 5-foot-long biological gyroscope. The leopard's tail is heavy, muscular, and incredibly active, shifting constantly to counterbalance the weight of a heavy carcass. Without this adjustment, the torque generated by a 300-pound weight hanging from the jaw would pull the cat right off the trunk. But strength and balance are only half of the equation. In 1967, George Schaller's work in Kanha National Park revealed that the leopard's brain is wired for a unique kind of spatial awareness. Schaller watched leopards navigate the complex geometry of the canopy, noting their ability to calculate the load-bearing capacity of a branch before they ever stepped onto it. They are structural engineers. They know which crooks in a tree will act as a natural pantry, wedging carcasses into forks where hyenas and lions cannot reach them. This form of cognitive caching requires a deep understanding of gravity and leverage. The leopard uses the architecture of the forest to protect its investment. The mystery deepens when we look at the leopard's skeletal density. Stephen Rowe's 2005 biomechanical study, often referred to as Bite Club, measured the forces exerted by big cat skulls. While the leopard's bite force was significant, the structural integrity of its humerus and femur stood out. These bones are thicker and more resistant to bending than those of other cats of similar weight. This reinforced frame allows the animal to absorb the shock of a vertical climb while carrying heavy prey. The leopard is a heavy-duty crane built into a lightweight chassis. Every time it hauls a kill upward, it tests the limits of what calcium and protein can support. In the Coxcomb Basin of Belize, Alan Rabinowitz observed similar behaviors in the smaller subspecies of leopards and their relatives, but nothing matched the sheer tonnage being moved in the African studies. Rabinowitz noted that the environment shapes the cat, but the leopard seems to shape the environment to its will. It creates a death-from-above zone that keeps every other animal in the forest on high alert. The smell of a kill high in an acacia tree draws scavengers like jackals and vultures, but they can only pace the ground in frustration. The leopard watches them from the shadows of the leaves, perfectly calm despite the massive exertion it just performed. Yet, even with this understanding of muscle density and skeletal reinforcement, the 2022 Kruger footage remains an anomaly. The math doesn't quite add up. To lift a 300-pound weight vertically, a 70-pound animal must generate a force that exceeds its own biological limits by a factor that should result in muscle tears or bone fractures. The leopard's heart rate during these climbs has never been measured, but it must be astronomical. We are looking at an animal that can overclock its own biology for a few minutes of extreme labor. This specialized adaptation ensures survival in a world where every meal is a target for larger, more aggressive competitors. Science has logged the leopard as a master of the vertical, but new data suggests we might be missing a piece of the puzzle. Is it possible there is a neurological trigger that allows these cats to bypass their own physical safety limiters during a climb? Some researchers are now looking at the way the leopard's central nervous system recruits motor units during high-stress maneuvers. It may not just be about how much muscle they have, but how much of that muscle they can activate simultaneously. This is the difference between a standard engine and one equipped with a nitrous boost. They are tapping into a reservoir of power that remains dormant during their hours of lounging in the sun. If the leopard can bypass the standard laws of feline physiology to conquer the vertical, it raises a haunting question about its cousins. We know the tiger owns the ground and the leopard owns the trees. But in the deep, waterlogged forests of the Amazon, the jaguar is doing something even more inexplicable. It isn't climbing away from the competition. It is seeking out the most armored prey on the planet and breaking them with a single bite. If the leopard's secret is vertical activation, the jaguar's secret might be something far more structural. A recent genomic study in the Brazilian Pantanal has just uncovered a skeletal mutation in a specific population of jaguars that shouldn't exist. The leopard's ability to move massive weight vertically is not merely a feat of strength, but a specialized biological override.
Why would a predator evolve the power to crush a skull like a dry twig if its environment didn't demand it? In 2024, researchers working in the humid, mosquito-thick corridors of the Brazilian Pantanal processed genetic data from a male specimen labeled Case 7. The numbers coming back from the lab defied logic. While a standard jaguar exerts 300 pounds of pressure per square inch, Case 7 was recorded at 2,000. This was no marginal increase. It was a biological deviation that put a 100-pound cat in the same crushing weight class as a 6-ton great white shark. The scientists in the field tent, surrounded by the smell of damp canvas and ozone from a distant thunderstorm, checked the calibration on their bite force transducers 3 times. The equipment was functioning perfectly. The animal was the anomaly. Evolution usually moves in a crawl, taking millennia to shave a millimeter of bone or sharpen a canine. But the genome of Case 7 suggested something far more abrupt. A team led by genomic specialists noticed a specific mutation in the FBN1 and TGFB2 genes, which regulate bone density and muscle attachment. In this specific jaguar, the sagittal crest, the ridge of bone on top of the skull where the massive jaw muscles anchor, was nearly double the thickness of its peers. It looked less like a modern feline and more like the heavy-set predators of the Pleistocene. The bone was not just larger. It was structurally reinforced at a molecular level to prevent the skull from imploding under the force of its own bite. When Fernando Securo published his 2011 study on skull morphology, he established that jaguars already possessed the most specialized killing tools of any neotropical cat. They do not hunt like leopards or tigers, who generally favor a suffocating throat grip. Jaguars go for the cranium. They pierce the temporal bones of caimans and the thick, armored shells of river turtles. It is a high-risk strategy that requires surgical precision and immense power. But Case 7 represented a leap beyond even that specialized baseline. The researchers found that the muscle fibers themselves were denser, packed with a higher concentration of fast-twitch myosin. This was a predator redesigned for a level of violence the current ecosystem rarely demands. Field notes from the Pantanal expedition described the animal's behavior as unnervingly efficient. Most jaguars spend significant time wrestling with large prey, looking for the optimal angle to bypass bone. Case 7 did not wrestle. It simply closed its jaws. The sound of a kill, usually a prolonged struggle of splashing water and snapping branches, was replaced by a single, sharp crack like a dry log snapping in midwinter. The researchers tracked this individual for months and noted that it consistently targeted the largest, most dangerous bulls in the region. The cat seemed aware of its mechanical advantage, hunting with a cold confidence that defied typical predator-prey caution. The mystery deepened when the team compared the DNA of Case 7 to the broader population. This was not a slow drift occurring across the species, but a localized, hyper-specific eruption of traits. Geneticists began to wonder if they were looking at a hopeful monster, a biological term for an organism that carries a profound mutation that could, under the right pressures, trigger a new evolutionary branch. The air in the lab grew heavy as the implications set in. If the environment changed, or if the prey grew larger or more armored, this single jaguar carried the blueprint for survival that its cousins lacked. In 1986, Alan Rabinowitz proved that jaguars were the masters of the Belizean rainforest, but even he noted that their size and power seemed capped by the available calories in their habitat. A cat can only get as big or as strong as its last meal allows. Yet Case 7 was not significantly larger in body mass than the average male jaguar. The anomaly was concentrated entirely in the hardware of the head and neck. It was a compact killing machine, utilizing a biomechanical efficiency that shouldn't have been possible without a massive increase in caloric intake. The researchers started looking for a trigger. They needed to know what in the Brazilian wilderness could force a genome to unlock this level of crushing power. The answer might lie in the deep history of the continent. South America was once home to massive glyptodonts, armadillo-like creatures the size of Volkswagen Beetles, and giant ground sloths. The predators of that era needed incredible bite force to survive. When those megafauna went extinct, the cats that remained supposedly downregulated their power to match the smaller prey of the modern era. But the DNA of Case 7 suggests that the instructions for that ancient, prehistoric power never actually left the building. They were just suppressed, waiting for a specific environmental key to turn the lock and bring the Pleistocene back into the light. During the 2024 study, the team managed to collect a final blood sample before Case 7 vanished back into the deep gallery forests. The centrifuge spun in the quiet of the field station, separating the components of a mystery that was growing more complex by the hour. They found that the jaguar's blood contained elevated levels of specific growth factors, usually only seen in animals recovering from massive skeletal trauma. But this cat wasn't injured. Its body was in a constant state of bone remodeling, perpetually thickening the jaw and skull to handle the 2,000 psi of pressure it generated daily. It was an animal living in a state of permanent, physiological escalation. Why now? That question kept the research team awake as the jungle night hummed outside their tents. The Pantanal is changing. Water levels are shifting, and the competition for prime hunting territory is becoming more desperate. In a world of shrinking resources, nature sometimes gambles on an outlier. Case 7 was that gamble, a biological prototype for a future where only the most extreme force ensures a lineage continues. The scientists filed their reports, but they knew they had only scratched the surface of what this individual represented. It was a warning. The data logs were closed, and the individual was officially entered into the archive. But as the researchers packed their gear, a new set of coordinates arrived from a different sector of the forest. Another jaguar had been spotted, and its tracks were deep, deeper than the animal's weight should allow. The team realized that Case 7 might not be a solitary freak of nature. If this mutation was spreading, the rules of the jungle were not just being bent. They were being rewritten in bone and muscle. But the most disturbing discovery didn't come from the skull measurements or the DNA sequences. It came from the prey remains found in the territory of Case 7. The bite marks weren't just on the skulls of caimans. They were found on objects no jaguar should ever be interested in. What the index concludes: the 2024 Pantanal genomic records confirm that the jaguar possesses a latent genetic trigger capable of manifesting prehistoric levels of bite force in a single generation, effectively bypassing standard.
Does a predator's success depend on the violence of the struggle or the cold geometry of the kill? In the dense jungles of India and the river basins of the Americas, every big cat operates by a strict, inherited logic. For the Bengal tiger, the strategy is a test of sheer physical endurance. George Schaller, working in Kanha National Park in 1965, spent hundreds of hours tracking the aftermath of these encounters to document a specific brutal pattern. The tiger utilizes a ventral neck bite, a crushing grip on the windpipe that relies on the cat's immense weight to pin the prey down. This is a slow process. A large sambar deer might struggle for several minutes, the air whistling through a collapsed throat, while the tiger holds firm, eyes wide, waiting for the light to fade from the prey's pupils. It is a muscular struggle between the largest cat on Earth and the heavy ungulates of the forest floor. The leopard operates with a different, more desperate physics. Mel Sunquist's 2002 synthesis of Felidae behavior highlights the leopard as a master of the suffocating muzzle hold. Because the leopard is often the smaller predator in a landscape shared with tigers or lions, it cannot afford a prolonged wrestling match on the ground. It must kill quickly or risk losing its meal to a scavenger. The leopard clamps its jaws directly over the nose and mouth of its prey, sealing the airway entirely. The sound of a leopard kill is eerily quiet. One hears only the muffled thumping of hooves against the dirt and the low, rhythmic growl of the cat. Once the struggle ceases, the leopard's true strength manifests. It ignores the horizontal plane of the jungle, using its specialized scapular muscles to haul a carcass twice its own weight into the canopy. But the jaguar represents a radical departure from these old-world techniques. In 2011, Fernando Securo at the Universidade Federal do Rio de Janeiro used computerized modeling to map the stress points of big cat skulls. He found that the jaguar does not bother with the throat or the muzzle. It has evolved to ignore the soft tissue entirely. Instead, the jaguar utilizes a canine in fossa strike, driving its teeth directly through the temporal bones of the skull or the thick plates of a caiman's armor. This is not suffocation. It is immediate neurological collapse. The jaguar targets the brain. While a tiger's bite is a hammer, the jaguar's bite is a pressurized spike. It is the only cat that has specialized in piercing the most heavily defended parts of a living organism, bypassing millions of years of prey evolution in a single explosive crunch. This mechanical advantage is what allowed Alan Rabinowitz to witness such strange behavior in Belize during his 1983 field studies. He tracked jaguars that seemed to ignore the traditional, easy prey of the jungle, seeking out armored targets instead. The jaguar's skull is shortened, which, according to Stephen Rowe's 2005 Bite Club study, increases the leverage of the masseter muscles. By the time the jaguar closes its jaws, the force exerted at the tips of the canines is enough to fracture solid bone. In the dark, muddy waters of the Pantanal, this creates a sound like a dry branch snapping underfoot. It is the sound of a skull failing. This specific evolutionary path suggests the jaguar was shaped by a world of hard shells and thick hides, a predator designed to crack open the impossible. The mystery deepens when we look at how these kill codes fail. K. Ulas Karant's 1995 data from Nagarahole revealed that tigers and leopards have a high failure rate. A tiger might stalk a gaur for 3 hours, only for the neck grip to slip on the thick, oily hide of the bull. The prey escapes, and the tiger is left exhausted, having burned thousands of calories for zero return. Evolution usually punishes this kind of inefficiency. If a predator fails too often, it dies. Yet, the big cats have persisted for millions of years, refining these specific mechanical strikes. They are locked in an arms race where the prey gets faster and the predator gets more precise. But the jaguar's method seems to have reached a plateau of terrifying perfection. It doesn't just kill, it deconstructs the anatomy of its victim. In the humid corridors of the Brazilian rainforest, researchers have found something that challenges our understanding of this perfection. While the tiger and leopard have remained relatively consistent in their size and bite force over the last century, the jaguars of the Pantanal are showing strange, localized spikes in capability. During a 2024 survey, a team of biologists recorded a series of kills that defied the known limits of jaguar biomechanics. They found the remains of large cattle with skulls not just punctured, but completely pulverized. The damage looked less like a bite and more like the work of a hydraulic press. When the team began collecting DNA samples from the individuals responsible for these kills, they expected to find standard jaguar markers. They were looking for the usual suspects of the jungle. Instead, the genomic data started to flag anomalies that shouldn't have been there. The bite force of a standard jaguar is already the highest of all big cats relative to its size, measured at 1,500 pounds per square inch. This is enough to crush a bowling ball. But the 2024 data indicated something had shifted. The mechanical failure points of the prey they were finding suggested a force significantly higher, a jump in power that shouldn't be possible through standard muscle mass alone. The researchers began to look closer at the skeletal structure of these specific cats. They were searching for a physical reason why a living animal would suddenly deviate from a million-year-old evolutionary blueprint. They were looking for a mutation in the bone itself. The question shifted from how they kill to what they are becoming. If the jaguar's skull is already the most efficient killing machine in the feline world, why would nature push it even further? In the early morning mist of the riverbanks, where the water is the color of tea and the air is thick enough to taste, these predators are moving with a new kind of authority. They are no longer just killing for food. They are demonstrating a level of mechanical force that seems overkill for the environment they inhabit. A caiman's skull is tough, but it doesn't require the force of a prehistoric monster to break. Yet, The evidence left behind in the mud suggests that something is driving these cats toward a new extreme of bone-crushing power. Stephen Rowe's models showed that the jaguar's skull is already at the limit of what biological tissue can typically withstand without fracturing itself. If you increase the bite force any further, the cat's own jaw would likely shatter under the pressure of its own muscles. It is a biological ceiling. To go beyond 1,500 pounds per square inches, the jaguar would need more than just bigger muscles. It would need a fundamental restructuring of its cranial density. It would need to become something else entirely. As the 2024 study moved into its final phase, the researchers realized they weren't just looking at a successful predator. They were looking at a biological anomaly that was breaking the laws of feline physics. The team eventually isolated a specific group of jaguars that seemed to be the source of these hyper-powerful kills. These individuals didn't look different from a distance, but their behavior was unsettlingly bold. They weren't just the masters of the jungle, they were acting as if nothing in the modern world could withstand them. When the researchers finally managed to sequence the full genome of a high-power individual, they found a mutation that changed everything they thought they knew about big cat evolution. It wasn't just a slightly stronger jaw. It was a structural rewrite of the skull that had never been documented in a living species. The data pointed toward a single, specific bone, a ridge of calcium that shouldn't have been there. What the index concludes. Does the life of a solitary hunter always end in a math problem where the answer is 0? For the big cats of the jungle, independence is a luxury bought with a terrifyingly high interest rate. In 1967, George Schaller sat in the back of a parked jeep in Kanha National Park and watched a tiger limp through the tall grass. The air smelled of dry earth and diesel fumes. Schaller noted a slight hitch in the cat's stride, a minor ligament strain from a landing that went wrong by an inch. To a lion in a pride, this is a week of rest while the sisters hunt. To a solitary tiger, it is the start of a countdown. Schaller's records from that period highlight a brutal reality. For these animals, there is no safety net, no shared meals, and no room for error. A single broken canine or a festering thorn in a paw isn't just an inconvenience, it is a death sentence. Wildlife rescue data across 3 continents reveals a staggering disparity in survival. Solitary hunters like the jaguar and the leopard face a 40% higher mortality rate from minor infections compared to pack hunters. In the Coxcomb Basin of Belize, Alan Rabinowitz tracked a male jaguar in 1984 that had successfully defended a territory for years. The cat was the peak of biological engineering until a minor skirmish with a peccary left a shallow gash on its forelimb. In the humid, stagnant heat of the rainforest, bacteria move faster than the immune system. Rabinowitz recorded the cat's decline over weeks. The animal didn't die from a rival's bite or a hunter's bullet. It died because it could no longer hold down prey for the 3 minutes required to suffocate it. The jungle is a factory that only rewards perfect machines. The cost of this isolation shows up in the very bones of the cats. When Mel Sunquist synthesized decades of feline data in 2002, he found that solitary cats carry the physical history of every mistake they have ever made. Their skeletons are maps of trauma. He described rib cages that had snapped and knitted back together in crooked angles, and jawbones pitted by abscesses that would have been treatable in a domestic setting. In the wild, a cat with a toothache cannot eat. If it cannot eat, it cannot maintain the massive muscle mass required to take down a water buffalo or a caiman. It is a feedback loop of starvation. The solitary hunter must be right 100% of the time, while the prey only has to be lucky once. Consider the leopard, the most successful of the solitary cats, yet the one living on the thinnest edge. In the Nagarhole forests of India, K. Ullis Karanth documented the intense pressure these animals face from larger competitors. A leopard must kill its prey, then immediately hoist that carcass, sometimes weighing twice its own body weight, into the canopy. This isn't a display of strength. It is a desperate act of theft prevention. The energy expenditure is astronomical. If the leopard is slightly fatigued, or if its grip is weakened by a minor muscle tear, it loses the kill to a tiger or a pack of dholes. Caranth watched as one leopard spent 3 hours stalking a deer, only to have the meal stolen in seconds because it hesitated for one breath. That leopard didn't eat for another 4 days. Case 7, the most unsettling entry in the archive, contradicts everything we know about this biological tax. It involves a specific jaguar in the Brazilian Pantanal, monitored by researchers in early 2024. This cat defied the math of the solitary cost. It was an older male, estimated to be at least 12 years old, which is ancient for a wild jaguar. Normally, a cat this age would be a walking skeleton with teeth worn to the gums and joints swollen with arthritis. Its territory should have been usurped by a younger, stronger rival months prior. Yet, when the team analyzed the GPS collar data, they found something that broke every known law of feline ecology. This cat wasn't slowing down, it was accelerating. The researchers working in a field lab where the humidity makes the paper of your notebook feel like wet cloth noticed a bizarre pattern in the jaguar's kill rate. It was taking down large prey every 48 hours, which is double the frequency of a healthy prime-age male. Even more confusing was the condition of the carcasses found in its wake. The skulls of the caimans and capybaras weren't just punctured, they were obliterated. There was a level of structural damage that didn't align with the bite force models established by Fernando Sicuro in 2011. The physics were wrong. It was as if the cat was using a hydraulic press instead of a jaw. The team managed to recapture the cat to replace its failing radio collar. When the veterinarian opened the animal's mouth to check its health, the tent went silent. The cat's teeth were not worn down. They were thick, ivory white, and showed no signs of the typical microfractures seen in older predators. But the real anomaly was the skull itself. Under the skin, the sagittal crest, the ridge of bone where the jaw muscles attach, felt like a jagged mountain range. It was twice the size of a standard jaguar's crest. This wasn't just a strong cat. It was a biological outlier that should not have been able to survive the metabolic cost of growing such heavy bone. The 2024 genomic study that followed was supposed to explain a simple case of superior fitness. Instead, it revealed a mutation that had never been documented in a living feline. Usually, when a bone grows thicker, it becomes more brittle. That is the trade-off. But this jaguar's bone density was off the charts, and the structural integrity was more akin to reinforced concrete than biological tissue. The researchers began to wonder if they weren't looking at a lucky survivor, but at a pivot point in evolution. Had the solitary cost finally forced a mutation that allowed a single animal to bypass the limitations of its own anatomy? While the team was processing the blood samples, they looked back at the camera trap footage from the previous 3 months. They noticed something they had missed in the initial review. The old male wasn't just hunting more, he was hunting differently. He was ignoring the traditional geometry of death that big cats use to conserve energy. He wasn't waiting for the perfect angle. He was simply walking up to prey and crushing it through sheer, overwhelming force. He was behaving as if he knew he couldn't be injured. He was a solitary hunter who had discarded the caution that kept his species alive for millions of years. But then, the data took a dark turn. On April 12th, the jaguar's collar sent a mortality signal. When the team reached the coordinates, they found the cat dead in a clearing. There were no marks on him, no signs of a struggle, and no infection. When they performed the field necropsy under the shade of a rain tree, they found that his heart had literally given out. It was enlarged to 3 times its normal size. The mutation that gave him the power to crush skulls had demanded a metabolic price his internal organs couldn't pay. He was a machine that had run too hot for too long. But as they examined the body, they found something else, a detail that changed the entire meaning of the case. The jaguar wasn't the only one of his kind in that clearing. What the index concludes. Could a single predator rewrite the laws of feline anatomy? This male jaguar, documented in the Brazilian Pantanal, possesses a bite force measured at 2,000 pounds per square inch. That figure is double the average for its species. The 2024 genomic record, filed under Case 7, finally provided the data that field researchers had whispered about for years. It confirms that this cat is a functional super predator shaped by a rare, localized evolutionary shift. This specific individual possesses a physical capability that reclassifies it as a biological outlier, a creature whose jaw strength exceeds every other land predator walking the earth. While a standard jaguar can crack a turtle shell, this animal operates on a different mechanical scale. Recall the caiman skull mentioned when we began. It looked as though it had been struck by an industrial press, but we now know that was not a fluke of decay or a lucky strike. It was the result of a biological machine we are only beginning to comprehend. The 2024 study, led by a team of geneticists and biomechanical engineers, focused on a specific individual nicknamed the Ghost of the Pantanal. They used genomic sequencing to isolate a rare duplication of the bone density gene. This mutation is combined with a highly pronounced sagittal crest, which is the ridge of bone atop the skull where jaw muscles attach. In this individual, the ridge is twice the thickness of a standard male. This provides the leverage necessary to generate 2,000 pounds of pressure without the skull fracturing under its own power. The discovery began in a humid field tent, smelling of damp canvas and high-octane mosquito repellent. A researcher sat hunched over a ruggedized laptop, watching the results of a DNA kit processed from a darted specimen. The genetic markers for skeletal mineralization were off the charts, making the numbers seem impossible. It appeared the animal was growing bones designed for a creature twice its size. When the team cross-referenced this with the 2011 skull morphology studies by Fernando Securo, the pieces fell into place. Securo had already mapped how the jaguar's skull was a masterpiece of neotropical engineering, but Case 7 represented the extreme. It was the biological ceiling of what a feline frame could support. Imagine the force of a small car being dropped from 10 feet, concentrated into 4 points the size of a human thumb. That is the physics of this cat's strike. In the Pantanal, the water is thick with silt and the air is heavy with the scent of rotting vegetation and blooming water hyacinths. A researcher recorded the sound of a hunt from 50 yards. He described it not as a crunch, but as a sharp, wet explosion, the sound of a caiman's skull being pulverized. Most predators hunt by finding the softest part of the prey. This cat targets the hardest part. It seeks out the armored plating of the head, knowing that its own biological hardware is superior to any natural defense. This is a documentation of evolution happening in real time. The 2024 genomic study suggests that this bone density duplication might be a response to the specific pressures of the Pantanal, where the prey is armored and the competition is fierce. The researchers noted that the cat's diet consisted almost exclusively of large reptiles. Over generations, the environment has selected for a skull that can act as a hammer. When the team analyzed the bite force, they realized they were looking at a number that surpassed the Nile crocodile and the spotted hyena. It is a level of power that should be impossible by the laws of feline anatomy, yet the evidence is recorded in the genome. Alan Rabinowitz noted during his 1986 studies in Belize that the jaguar was the ultimate survivor, a cat that refused to be categorized. The Ghost of the Pantanal is the ultimate proof of that statement. The cat's sagittal crest is so developed that it creates a visible ridge under the fur, a literal crown of bone. When the animal moves through the tall grass, the muscles along its jaw and neck ripple with an almost unnatural density. It is a solitary killer that has mastered the math of the jungle. It knows that one strike, delivered with 2,000 pounds of force, ends the equation instantly. There is no struggle, only the sudden, violent application of physics. The implications of the 2024 study reach far beyond the borders of Brazil. If one population of big cats can develop a mutation this extreme, what else is hiding in the unmapped corners of the world's rainforests? We often think of evolution as a slow, million-year crawl, but Case 7 shows it can be a sudden, sharp spike. The geneticists involved in the project described the feeling of looking at the data as a "wait, what?" moment. It was a realization that the textbooks on mammalian bite force needed to be rewritten. They were looking at a living anomaly, a creature that had stepped across the threshold of its own species' limitations to become something else entirely. The air in the research lab was cold, a sharp contrast to the sweltering jungle where the samples were taken. The lead scientist held the printout of the genomic sequence, his fingers tracing the duplicated markers. He knew this document would change the way we view the genus Panthera. The jaguar has always been the outlier of the big cats, the one that bites through bone instead of suffocating the throat. But this specific record proved that the jaguar is still pushing its own boundaries. It is a biological machine still being upgraded by the harsh demands of the wild. The evidence is clear, dated, and filed away. The strongest bite on land belongs to a ghost in the trees. We have spent decades tracking these predators, using radio collars and camera traps to peek into their private lives. We thought we knew the limits of their strength, but we were wrong. The 2024 data serves as a reminder that nature does not care about our classifications or our estimated maximums. It only cares about what works. For the ghost of the Pantanal, what works is a skull made of reinforced biological armor and a bite that can shatter a prehistoric reptile in a single second. The world is still full of creatures that refuse to be bound by the rules we have written for them. What the index concludes: the jaguar of the Pantanal represents a documented leap in predatory evolution, possessing a genetic bone density mutation that grants it the most powerful bite force of any living land mammal. Subscribe a new breakdown like this every day.